In the name of the lost who carry the Swinish plains of carrion, under the burial song of the birds of burden, heavy with the drown and the grain dust, and bearing the ghost from the ground like pollen on the black.
There are plenty of musicians who, not without reason, are very sceptical of Milton Babbitt and what he stands for, but at the same time, there's no doubt that what he builds up out of this machine is also taken seriously by all sorts of people, including non-electronic composers like Stravinsky, as well as the electronic boys themselves.
Bethany, shall we try it again?
Is it true that this machine can produce any sound whatsoever?
This is a machine which is designed solely for the purpose of creating any imaginable sound, or I should say, for electronically creating any imaginable sound that the operator, preferably the composer, knows how to specify. And he must specify it in a kind of detail that has never been possible or necessary before. For example, a sound such as this. In very much the same way, but from a different source, he may create sounds which are not so much musical sounds as perhaps percussive noise sounds, such as this.
Is there any limit to this? You can play all these things simultaneously, I suppose, if you want to.
You can play them all simultaneously, if you'll forgive my American pronunciation, if you are prepared to then go to the programming equipment. You can't do these simultaneously only because this is merely for test, merely for the composer to discover what he has informed the machine to do. But he hasn't yet informed it in succession until he has gone to the programming equipment. To effect succession, to effect simultaneity, then he must go to the programming equipment.
By the programming equipment, you mean this typewriter?
I mean this punch device. The punches are simply nothing more than numerical instructions to the machine to produce certain things which the composer has already established within the electronics of the machine.
Yes, so that you, as it were, type messages to the machine
Exactly.
saying, this is what I want.
Precisely.
And then what comes out in the end can be multiple sound or single sounds, depending on what you
Absolutely.
set.
After we have committed it to tape. Tape functions here purely for purposes of storage, as it would in any conventional recording studio.
Yeah. What sort of sound eventually comes out then? Say you do, say it's multiple, you're not just using single.
In that case, the best thing for me to do is to play the very beginning of a new composition of mine, of which you will hear more, I trust, later on.
Are you really composing primarily, or exploring the new combinations of new sounds?
The answer is yes to both questions. But the new sounds aspect is not the most important one. I think you will find that for most composers, although they may be originally seduced by the notion of new sounds, and certainly the inventor of a machine such as this perhaps thinks that that is the paramount importance of his invention, the fact is that nothing becomes as old as quickly as a new sound. Composers who turn to this kind of demanding equipment are less concerned with new sound than with what they consider more fundamental aspects of musical composition. The control of time in all of its aspects and all of its manifestations. Because time here is represented by length along this paper tape. That kind of control we've never had before.
You'll have to spell that out for me, if you will, on the machine.
Well, rather than attempting to do it directly on the machine, perhaps I can do it more dramatically, if what you might consider less legitimately, with an example that I've already recorded. Now, this is a purely electronic synthesis of a very familiar work, the opening measures of the F major two-part invention of Bach. Let me emphasize that there is no attempt here to do anything with imitative tone color. Indeed, this is the most neutral kind of electronic color. We're concerned here with the time factor, which we have been discussing. So first, let's hear it at a fairly reasonably fast tempo. Now that simply represents a punching out, a key punching out on the programming input. Now without any further punching whatsoever. The same thing was run through at twice the speed. Remember, the speed will affect only the speed and nothing else. And here it is at a tempo which far exceeds any known human capacities. Now, there is one instance. Now, another instance would be this. With exactly the same punching again, we can throw one toggle switch and produce the following result. And I trust you will forgive me and understand that this is purely for demonstration, a demonstration which will not involve the notion of what kind of music is electronic music. The familiar example is so that the unfamiliarity will be more thoroughly emphasized in the more relevant domain. You can see that here the pitch level of what would be in normal performance, the left hand, has been automatically altered. Yeah. And we can produce a much more complex result of the same kind, and this will demonstrate something else in the realm of time, precision of ensemble. There we had four voices, all resulting from re-recordings of the same key punching. Now, another aspect of time, and one that concerns many contemporary composers. I can mention specifically Stravinsky. This has to do with complex tempo relationships. So we'll hear now that same, if you wish, right hand again. But when the left hand enters, it proceeds at a tempo which is 5/4 faster than its preceding tempo, or the tempo of the right hand. Finally, one other and very different kind of mutation which can be effected immediately and automatically by the machine. The whole composition is transposed down an octave, and the tone color is changed ever so slightly by merely altering the upper harmonics. Nothing more than that. It's a very, very slight change. It produces not a particularly electronic or, if you wish, far-out sound. What it produces, rather, is something which, for all its modesty of sound, could not be produced by any known musical instrument. No musical instrument can play in this register with both this speed and this kind of envelope. And there you have it.
I like that. Play it again.
Would you like to hear it again? You'll have to wait for me to rewind.
No difficulty. As far as I'm concerned, I like that last one because it simply seems to me a pleasant musical experience. But I'm not at all clear why it is that you're doing all these other ones. I mean, presumably you could make the left hand go 80 times as fast, or 27 times as fast, or so I wouldn't hear. But why bother?
Well, this, of course, is merely for very simple demonstration of what the machine can do, what the machine's capacities are in the very simple sense. It's also to overcome
But what point is there in the machine doing it?
Oh, the point in the machine doing it is that these are all, with these rudimentary materials, with these, if you wish, inappropriate materials, demonstrations of kinds of techniques in which composers have been interested in non-electronic music. Any composer who responsibly turns to the composition of electronic music, be it on this machine or anything comparable, must be involved at some time or another, probably preceding his composition and during his composition, with research. What can, I think, in all accuracy be termed basic research? Because he is dealing with the
Research
irreducible
in what?
ingredient. He's research in two things: in the nature of musical sound, and above all, the nature of the perception of musical sound. Because after all, the conventional composer, and I use this term purely to describe a composer who writes for non-electronic instruments, will very often have to ask himself the question, does what I have composed exceed the performing capacities of the instrument and of the performer? Now, the composer who writes for a medium such as this has to ask himself a very different question. Does what I have created, does what I can create, exceed the perceptual and conceptual capacities of the trained listener? Because the hand is very, very seldom faster than the ear, but electronic speeds are far faster than the ear. And electronic instruments such as this can produce discriminations, differentiations, which far exceed the discriminative capacities of the ear.
Sounds that my ear simply can't hear.
It can produce sounds that your ear perhaps cannot hear, or will hear in a completely different way from the specifications, as we would normally regard them, as kinds of notations. Now, may I show you an example of this?
Yeah.
For example, here is simply a single line, a single succession of notes. You might ask yourself how many different notes are being played in this very short time interval. But I will tell you that this reaches just about the threshold of perception for the most thoroughly trained musician. Now, if I should ask you how many different events you heard in that succession of time, which was about a second, what would you answer?
Play it again.
Oh, I'd be delighted.
18.
18 is a very good guess. There happen to have been 24. And it is true that we are now reaching just the limits of perception. We know that if we repeat that example a few times, a thoroughly trained musician can take down every one of those notes, though this far exceeds the capacity of any human performer or any musical instrument. But now suppose we change the tone color, change the octave, and have another succession of notes. How many pitches did you hear there? Let's try it again.
Well, I suppose about, what was your idea? 11.
Ooh, that's a very, very good guess. Actually, of course, there are 12. But if you actually heard 11 notes,
I didn't
then you were the
11.
most
I just
perfect
think so
subject.
about 11.
You were the most perfect subject we have ever had. The musician will usually guess 6 or 7. Now, we have specified 12. We know that there are 12. We know that 12 are emanating from the loudspeaker. We can test that by other means. But we have found no musician who can take down all of those 12 notes, for all that they were at the same speed as the preceding succession. We also know exactly why they choose to hear the notes that they do. This is something that could never have been done before, but something that must be done with the use of these instruments and in order to be able to use these instruments to the full of their capacities. Listen to the same thing again, a little slower. You heard more notes?
Yes, I think so.
You should have. And slower? More notes creeping in? Now we're going to play it at half of the original speed, and you should be able eventually to hear all 12 notes with perfect precision. We're back below the threshold. And that is it.
Now, you personally don't use this machine, do you, above all for research, but rather primarily for composing?
The two are at the moment inextricably connected. There's no doubt about that. We have to do research. We are doing research, in a sense, every moment that we compose. We are never quite sure of what we are going to get by way of result, as long as we are doing something that we have never done explicitly before, and that seldom comes to pass. Rather, at every moment that we're composing, we are doing research. We are doing a certain amount of research before we compose and while we compose. But of course, the primary study here is that of musical composition and musical compositions.
How long does it take actually to learn to handle this machine?
This, of course, depends a great deal on the composer's background. If he has a certain amount of technological, mathematical, physical, acoustical background, he could learn to operate this machine, perhaps not to his own satisfaction, but to operate it up to a certain extent within about 6 months. To master the machine, I haven't mastered it, and to my knowledge, no one has.
How long have you been working on it?
I've been working at this machine in more or less what has to be spare time from teaching for about 3 years.
Are you a mathematician?
I have been a professional mathematician.
Are you more of a mathematician than you are a musician?
There are those who would say yes. I would insist no. I could invoke the years of training in music and the number of musical compositions as opposed to the number of mathematical papers which I have produced, which are none, though some people regard my musical papers as mathematical.
Most of your original and early music was, of course, conventional music.
Some of my music still is for conventional instruments, if not conventional music.
All right, for conventional instruments. Now, why is it that you personally have been so drawn into this particular field for composition?
Well,
were you dissatisfied?
Well, I think in this case I can answer not only for myself, but for many of my fellow composers who have turned to this very demanding and difficult medium. It's not that we did not know what to do. It's that we knew exactly what we wanted to do, and this kind of medium provided the only means for doing this. Again, I would insist that this was not so much in the realm of new sounds, but in the realm of control of what in very general terms we could call the rhythmic factors of music and the loudness factors of music, which we simply cannot control in conventional performance. I must add something else.
You mean that a piano or an orchestra is too insensitive for your demand?
It's not too insensitive. That sounds like a qualitative description. It simply has its inherent physical limitations. And we are making what we consider reasonable musical demands which transcend these limitations. But if I may, I would like to add one practical note, and that is that in this country at least, everything militates against the composition of complex contemporary music. The long, largely unrewarded hours of composition, the problems involved in copying the parts, in preparing the score, in the most material aspects, then the insufficient number of rehearsals, and as a result, the usually inadequate performance. We are being saved from that.
You're being driven economically to compose electronically.
In a sense, of course, this may seem rather paradoxical when you consider the possible and probable cost of a machine such as this. I am very lucky to have this available to me. But we see composers turning to much simpler, much more laborious and tedious methods of electronic composition for this reason, among more profound musical ones.
Why is it that when you have a machine like this, which, as you say, can produce any conceivable sound, why is it that so much of the electronic music that is produced seems to have a similar quality of idiom? If I can be rude about it, it belongs a little, one feels, to the squeak and gibber school, so to speak. To put it in another way, the kind of words one associates all too frequently with electronic music are words like bloop and bleep, aren't they?
Yes, well, I think that can be attributed to the fact that this, again, was the composer's choice, and the composers to whom you're referring were not working with a machine such as this, but working with much more simple material. That is, with material in which they were obliged to splice together each independent musical, that is, electronically made sound, and effect succession in that way. Now, obviously, they were immediately intrigued by the possibilities of juxtaposing unlikely sounds, of producing speeds of succession which were impossible before.
Yes,
now, this
simply because this was new.
This was new in the very same sense which I think in the early days of film, people were deeply intrigued by the possibility of a car moving backwards far faster than it could move forwards, or a diver who dove from the pool back to the diving board. These were all very intriguing, but they didn't serve to either set the tone of the future movie or, above all, to discredit the film as an art.
No, this was learning the business.
Learning the business and being intrigued by certain things which could not have been done before, which could be done in no other way. Once the novelty had worn off, they turned to more serious things.
Can I put what I'm sure must have been put to you on thousands of occasions? Are you bothered? Does it occur to you to think that there is a kind of dehumanized aspect about the sounds?
I don't quite know what that means. Now, if someone means by this simply as trivial a thing as the fact that these sounds are created by this machine, which consists of electronic tubes and copper wires and metal, as opposed to another kind of musical machine which is made up of ivory and copper wires and metal, then of course I don't attempt to answer what I regard as an absurd question. If, on the other hand, they are saying that some of these sounds do not have the richness of dimension, if you wish, of conventional sounds, then they're right. In certain respects, this is still true. Remember, we are just beginning.
It isn't just richness of dimension, is it? I mean, behind the piano, you feel the presence of the pianist.
Well, you should feel the presence of a composer here who simply happens to be, at this moment, also his own performer. Now, if it sounds in some sense dehumanized, perhaps it's also because you cannot see a performer. That we can never supply. There's something a little, I would say, unnatural, even undesirable about entering a concert hall and being confronted by a row of speakers. I think this is inappropriate, and eventually we hope that everyone will have good equipment, and then we'll simply send our tapes to the interested people to be heard at their leisure and as many times as they wish. I do not take the aspect of the human element very seriously, except that it represents, if you wish, a criticism of the kind of sound that we are able to produce at a very early stage of development.
Yes, but the criticism is of your head, not of the machine.
Yes, if they are criticizing my head and saying that it is somehow non-human, I can only offer my head.
Yes, yes.
For example, let me take this opportunity to play the beginning of my latest work, which is not yet finished, Ensembles for Synthesizer. Now, this work is written for 4 tracks to issue from 4 separate loudspeakers, and that's an integral part of the compositional conception, the spatial distribution, which I can now completely control. Now, you'll be hearing it as it issues from 1 loudspeaker. This is not, in any sense of the word, my work as it was completely conceived, but nevertheless, it is my work.